Hi, I'm Peter Gethers, Carl Hiaasen's editor at Knopf, talking to Carl about his new book, Squeeze Me. So we'll start with a simple question, which is just tell us a little bit about Squeeze Me.
Well, this was a book I wanted to write. It's set in Palm Beach in modern times, uh, and it deals with a couple of issues. One is there's a figure in the book, and he could be anybody, but he happens to be the president that has a mansion in Palm Beach. And there's also the environmental issue of giant invasive pythons, which we have in Florida, which almost everybody's seen on the videos at this point. So the idea of pythons in Palm Beach appealed to me. An 18-foot snake loose in that particular society had a I thought it was perfect for Florida, and it's something we can all pray will happen in real life.
Well, one of the reasons people love your books is that you take reality and stretch it in an absurd manner, almost to the breaking point. Do you ever worry that real life might be getting a little too absurd to keep up this pattern?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last few years, there is no breaking point is the problem, especially if you write satire and humor. And I've talked to Dave Barry and I have talked about this quite a bit. Is that one little notch, a little click of the dial that you reserve as a writer when you're writing satire, just to take a situation and make it one more level of absurd. The dial isn't there anymore because everything you think of, everything you think to write about, becomes in the next day's headline a reality. So I think it's way more challenging to write this kind of humor right now, and it just doesn't seem to be. I mean, a lot of people say, well, you've got so much material to choose from now, and the trouble is that it's very hard to improve on the material in real life to make it more absurd.
Well, going back to the reality, and you sort of started talking about this, but one of the key characters in this book is an overweight and insanely tanned and rather deranged president of the United States. I don't know how you managed to create such a character, but would you say this is your most politically centered book? Not that it's about politics, but it's very pointed.
It probably is, I would say, in the sense that to have a character who's in the middle of the political world, but for me, the attraction was having the connection to Florida. All my novels are set in Florida, and it's where I live and where I was born and raised. So it was the idea of having, whatever, regardless of what might be going on in Washington, to have someone in the White House who makes these pilgrimages to Florida and brings that world with him, and it just. Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, I guess it's hard not to write about this stuff now. All the novels I've tried to, there's always been some sort of topical edge, and not necessarily politics, but different things going on, and the news cycle is dominated by this stuff right now. So it was hard not to bring it in there. And then the more often, also Palm Beach has been is a good setting for the kind of writing I do. It's like when I wrote Star Island, most of it was set on South Beach in Miami. South Beach is a very, very silly place, but Palm Beach is even sillier. There's a whole different kind of pretension, and if you're writing satire and humor, and the best of it is pointed, the best of it has got a sharp edge. You want to set a story in a place like that because it is rich and fertile with silliness.
Well, you've made it particularly silly. I have to say, I don't particularly want to give this away to anyone, but every time you refer to a family and a family name, you give their business at the such and such family, and I have to say every single time you did it with a different family, it made me laugh out loud throughout the entire book. So you
Yeah.
captured that
Well,
silliness.
that's the identifier. The social identifier is where your family made their money, whether it was in textiles or personal lubricant or whatever the family fortune was. That's your ID, because so many of the people down there have never worked a day in their life on that island.
Well, you
But
captured
the
it
money came
perfectly.
from somewhere, but it's silly in a Monty Python sort of way. You imagine John Cleese taking over one of these scenarios, but the reality is that, for instance, they had a I mean, you sent me the story. They had the protest in Palm Beach the other day. The whole nation, every little town and everywhere is having protests. But in the town of Palm Beach, one 80-year-old woman shows up to protest George Floyd's death. One. So there you go.
Well, she's my hero now too.
At least nobody pushed her down. That's the good
Yeah.
thing you can say, is nobody pushed her down.
So you've done this a few times in other novels, but your lead character, and there are many, but your number one lead character in this, I think, is just an absolutely great woman. I love her. And I hope you bring her back somehow, but she's tough and funny and smart and moral. Do you like writing women, and do you have
I do.
Do you have a particular affinity for it?
I do. I like. Well, it's been my experience in my life that women are at least 2 or 3 steps ahead of the men in their lives, and so the characters I've done, even Aaron in Striptease, especially, and Jolene and Lucky You, those were some of my favorite characters. They were sharp and funny, but they're always a couple steps ahead of the guys who are pursuing them. And I think Angie is the same way in this book. I started out, I wrote, probably tried to write 4 or 5 chapters. I started out with the lead character being a man. And yeah, and I just thought, God, this would be so much more interesting, especially since her job is, and we have these businesses all over Florida where you call a number if you've got wildlife in your house or bothering you, possums, alligators, whatever it is. There are people you can call, and they show up with a truck and they capture whatever creature has invaded your little suburban space, and they take it away. And I thought, this would be, and it's a job that particular profession is dominated by men because they're, bigger, burly. That I thought it would be really cool to have a woman in that job who's just as good. And she had a background. She'd been a wildlife officer and a veterinarian. And so I thought that, to me, it became a much more interesting story when I switched it.
Well, I love her. How much research do you do? Because in this book, there's sort of inside FBI stuff. I mean, obviously, the animal, her job really well, but how much research and how real is it the way you deal with the FBI and the police,
Secret Service? Yeah, because there's Secret Service characters. I read a couple books about the Secret Service, and there's where you can find out sort of the structure and how, especially the presidential detail and the how they assign the family details in the Secret Service. So beyond that, and I read a little bit about the Academy, but beyond that, it was just I needed those characters, and but I wanted to be factually correct about how the hierarchy of the thing works. But the animal stuff. I grew up down here. I was I've been on a couple python hunts. We never caught any, but I've been on a couple of those. But I have always had snakes and always had critters, and so that part was easy. And I have friends who have worked in that business of going out, and somebody calls up and they got an alligator in their pool. So I know how that stuff works. But the rest of it, for instance, there's a piece of, without giving too much away, there's a piece of jewelry that plays a prominent role in the novel. It disappears from somebody, a Palm Beach matron who fate has taken away from us, and it's called a conch pearl. There's beautiful little pink pearls, and years ago, nobody wanted them. They come from a conch shell, mostly in the Bahamas, and nobody wanted them. They're cleaning the shells for the meat, and they're selling the conch, and they were giving away to tourists. And they caught on now. They become this incredibly hot item because they're beautiful, all different colors of pink, and they're beautiful little gems. Well, I have a good friend who was a jeweler up in Pensacola, so he sent me a lot of stuff about conch pearls, and it's fascinating because I'd known about them, but how one out of every 10,000 conchs that they catch is going to have something that may or may not be a pearl in it, and how they become really trendy, and all the, Tiffany and everyone else, and Mickey Mood, all those, they're now selling these things for huge amounts of money. So I did a fair amount of research to get that part of that right for the plot, and because it was kind of key to a plot point in there. And
it is key, yeah.
And then the town of Palm Beach, I've spent some time in. I didn't need to. I know people, and you know people who spend time there, and it's hard to really write a scene that couldn't happen there, because almost everything is happening there.
Well, I think we're probably just about out of time, but I just want to, this is not so much a question as a comment, is this book has changed my life in one way, which is your writing about snakes and pythons in particular, in that I'm now afraid to ever leave my house. So I just want to say thank you for ruining my life.
We should point out that when I was in New York before the pandemic stuff broke out, that I had done a photo session with Elena Siebert and with a big python, and I had told you that you don't need to come to Florida to get a picture. I guarantee you that someone's got a big old python in New York City that we can get pictures with. And sure enough, Bumble the python, and he was only I think a 10-footer, 11-footer, but it's still a big animal. And I think I sent you, or Lena sent you, the pictures, and I remember there was you were affected profoundly by that.
Well, I haven't had a good night's sleep since, but other than that, it's been okay. But all right, well, thank you. This book is going to be a giant success, and let's hope the world gets a little more sane.
Yeah, it'll make my job easier if it does. It was great talking to you as always, Peter.
Great, Carl. I'll talk to you soon.